What's up? Eric from Satisfied Incorporated. Today I wanted to talk about these parts that I had made. These are the strut spacers. So these spacers are going to go on the bottom of your strut like this. And then your, whatever you want to call it, your steering arm, your knuckle assembly will bolt on here. So what you're doing, instead of bolting to here and you're bolting to here, is you're spacing your steering arm down. This is going to be about an inch, 25 millimeters. So what I want to talk about today is we're going to talk about the benefits. Why do you want these? So these are going to be for people who lowered their cars. And I'm going to try to technically explain the benefits you'll have by using that spacer and spacing your arm down. If you want the short story is if you have your car at, say, a stock height, your control arm and your tie rods will be, well, let's just call them straight. And then if you lower your car, this is the wheel goes up, and now you've got an angle on that control arm and those tie rods. So if we put that spacer in here, it drops it back down. So it's going to make everything level again. So let me go through and I'm going to try to explain to you why you want those level and the effects that it has if they're not level. All right, so I got the car, we'll call it jacked up. It's not really jacked up. It's on these, I use these alignment plates to set my alignment. But if you watch my previous video on these, this is a good example of something else that these are good for, is you can set your car up on this, and that's close to the same, I guess you call it ride height as your tire. So the distance here would be the same diameter as your tire. We're underneath the car here, and this car is on airbags. So this is going to work out really good because I can lift and I can lower this car to show you the differences. Right now I've got this car lifted. This should be somewhat close to stock ride height, maybe a hair lower. I don't know. But I've got it lifted all the way up on my air ride. And so we're close. So if you take a look, here's my control arm. My control arm, it still might be a hair pointed up, but it's pretty level. It's not bad. And then behind it here, this is my tie rod. So your tie rod and your control arm should be on the same angles. That's the way it should be designed, so it should be all good. So this is what you can see. This is stock, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lower it. I'll lower it about to ride height. Okay, so here's where we're at with ride height lowered. So this is, I mean, I could probably show you a picture of what my car looks like, but you know, I've got the top of the fender just above the tire at ride height. So this is somewhat the lowest you can run and still be able to steer. You might be able to go a little bit lower, but you get the point, is it's a lowered car. So now if you look at this control arm, you got an angle on it. Tie rod, you got an angle on it. And now we'll look at the differences. This is stock with no spacer installed at the lowered ride height. So notice the angle. And then you can look, if you see my spacers installed up here, and then look at the arm. And you can see I got the sway bar disconnected because it'll mess with it a little bit. There's a difference, but we're a little bit more flat. So we're pretty close to being flat. It's not perfect, but we're way closer to stock. Okay, so here's where I'll try to explain what's happening. So here's what you got. You got your strut, and then you're going to have your control arm and your tie rod is going to be going inwards towards here. Here's obviously your wheel. You got all the wheel studs and whatnot. So now if we want to change the camber on our cars, what we typically do is we use a camber plate like this. This thing's not turned right, but use a camber plate like this. And so if you look where the wheel's mounted, if it's straight up and down, you've got zero camber. So if you tilt it in like this, now you've got negative camber, right? So what we usually do for that is we usually take the part where it's mounted on the car, and this is the camber plate, and that's what these little slots are for, is these slots make it so you can move it. And so now you're going to move it. This is too drastic, but obviously just to prove a point. So now you got a ton of camber, right? So that's going to move the wheel in. So if you understand, moving the top of the shock, the coil over, whatever you got, moving the top in is also going to take the wheel in, right? So moving the top out moves the wheel up. So this whole thing controls the angle of your wheel. Okay, so if we're talking about the top does that, and then so the bottom does that too, right? The bottom will move it also. You know, I'm not holding the top perfectly straight, but that'll move it too. So if you want the least amount of movement, you would have it flat, because when you're driving down the road, it's going here. And let me just do this. So it's super close to my hand, right? The whole time that's traveling down the road. So if you lower your car and now you're at like this, when you're traveling down the road, now you're like this. Look how far away it gets from my hand. So if it gets far away from my hand, your strut has to follow that. So what we just talked about, you move the top in, it increases camber. You move the bottom in, it's going to decrease camber, right? But hopefully you get the point. Like say we went extreme example. Say your control arm was like this. Now when you're driving down the road, look how far away it would get from your hand, just with that little bit of movement. So here is like it stays close to the hand. Now look how far away it gets the hand. So this is why we want it as level as possible, because this will control your camber, which is what your control arm is doing, and it'll make sure your tire is not getting wild swings throughout the travel. Okay, so hopefully that's easy enough to understand. It is complicated, but maybe you'll just have to take my word for it. So the other thing that we're doing with this is the tie rod. Okay, so I went over the control arm first on purpose because hopefully you grasped that concept. Now, if you talk about the tie rod is going to control other things. Tie rod controls your steering, which is what your steering is, your steering force. It's also your steering angle, and then it's also your alignment. So there's three things going on with your tie rod. So the tie rod's the more important one of the two. So if we go back to my example, if this is your tie rod when stock, well, let me explain it this way. So if you have your tie rod hooked up and everything's flat and you set your wheel at 0 toe, when you go through the travel, this doesn't get a lot shorter. It doesn't get a lot longer. So let's say you set 0 toe with your tie rod like this. Now you're going through your travel and it gets further away. When it's this far away, you're actually steering your wheels. Every time your suspension travels up and down, the more angle this tie rod has, the shorter it gets and the longer it gets. And that's how you adjust your alignment, is by the length of your tie rod. So if you're constantly going shorter and longer, that's obviously a problem, right? So this distance here to here is shorter than this distance here to here. Let's get extreme. So this distance here, you know, this is like, I don't know, let's just say 2 inches. And then all of a sudden this is 6 inches. Well, why does that matter? Because when you're steering, if you steer, this is maximum travel this way and then maximum travel that way. But now, just because this is shorter, this tire is actually in. And so when I steer, this thing's shorter. So you don't get, your tires will do like this instead of like this. So you're getting less steering angle. I hope that makes sense too. I don't know how else to explain that one. But basically it's this changes length. So you need this to be as long as possible. If it's shorter, it's just, you don't get the angle. That hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and then the third thing that your tie rod is going to do is your tie rod is going to push the tire. So this is talking about strength, right? So if you want strength in something, that tie rod wants to push while it's flat. You wouldn't push something up because it's traveling like this. You wouldn't push upward to push something like this. This would be like me grabbing the jack handle and then I'm pushing up to push it this way. If I want to push the jack this way, I push it this way. I pull it straight towards me. I don't go up like that, right? So you wouldn't push something sideways like this. You push something sideways like this. So same thing with your tie rod. You want it to push like this. You don't want it to push like this. And, you know, I mean, I don't know if it matters either, but when you have something at an angle like this and it's pushing, I mean, I can bend it easily like that. If it's straight, I can't even bend it. So I don't know if strength's going to come into the equation, but steering tie rods are going to have an alignment problem unless they're straight. If they're up and down, it just gets shorter and longer, just the way it is. So you're going to have alignment problems. You're going to have steering strength problems. You're going to have the amount of turning radius that you have also. Oh, and then one other thing I did forget to mention, you're also going to have the quickness of the steering will matter too, because if you're pushing this in and out, so if it's flat and you move 1 inch, it will move the tire 1 inch. If you're at a 45-degree angle, it moves the tire half an inch. So with your steering response, if your tie rod is angled up, it's going to be slower to react, because where it used to move 1 inch, now it's moving a half inch. So you want it flat for the speed of steering also. So I don't know if I explained this well, but basically that helps you, hopefully it helps you understand why you want these strut spacers. They're helpful for any amount of lowered car. So take a look at your control arms and your tie rods at ride height, and just take a look at them and go, are they pointed up? Well, we want to bring that down. And I've got 25 millimeter spacers where it's 1 inch thick, and it obviously brings it down 1 inch, but it's not a load. I mean, you could pretty much use these on any car that's lowered even a little bit, and I think it would be helpful. Just kind of looking at what we just looked at a stock suspension, the stock suspension is not exactly flat either, and maybe that's because I'm not at a actual stock ride height, but I would get that down just a little bit, and you want that thing to be perfectly flat ideal, which might not happen. So anyway, hopefully that helps understand why these things are helpful. I have these made for the E23, which I don't think they've ever been made before for the E23. I only have a couple of them because, you know, let's just face it, we're not a huge demand community for the E23. Same with the E12, early E24. I got a couple of those made. And then when the E23, E24, E12 stuff is gone, it's going to be gone. So get on those. E28, E24 stuff. I'm glad I checked these out before selling them, before I shipped them, because they actually didn't work. I somehow got tricked into buying a spare set of struts. And I was told they're E28, but they're actually E34. So I do have some strut spacers made for E34 by accident, which if you guys know any E34 guys that want these, send them my way. Those probably won't be made again. E24, E28 ones, they'll be here in like a week or two. This is the end of April 2024. So, and I'll probably have those made again because those are selling really well. So if you guys want E23, E12, E24, early E24, E34 stuff, get on it. But anyway, I hope that explains things. Even if you're not buying stuff, hopefully that explains a little bit of a car's geometry and how everything works. I get super into it, and I like tuning things, and I like making things work really well. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully that helps. Leave a comment. Hey, if I missed anything or if I got anything wrong, leave a comment. Let's help everybody else out, and we'll get it figured out. Thanks for watching.